Tuesday Trash Talk. My name is Cheryl Baldwin, and I'm with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, as well as run the What's In, What's Out program for the Recycle CT Foundation. So today we're going to be talking about composting, specifically compost in a bag. And before I begin, though, let me remind you, if you have a question or you want me to cover a topic in the future related to waste management, recycling, reuse, waste reduction, etc., by all means put it in the comments section. So today, composting, compost in a bag. So compost in a bag is an activity that I often will include in a professional development workshop for educators and teachers. And I thought it'd be fun to do today as school has started, but it started, in different ways. Everybody's doing it differently. So you may be at home learning from your teachers, or you may have a little bit of time with your parents in learning, and maybe parents, you're looking for some ideas. So this is a great activity. This is a fun project. So before I begin, let me remind you what composting is. So composting is the decomposition or breakdown of organic materials into a soil-like substance. It's when we put leaves and food scrap in a pile and it all breaks down and it looks like soil at the end. However, when we compost, it's not a natural process anymore. It's a controlled process, in that we might put it in a bin, or we might put it in a big pile, or a windrow if you're a farmer or a commercial operation. And so today we're controlling it by putting it in a bag. Despite being in a bag, it's going to have the same properties, or the same process, if you will, as a larger system. And that we need to remember four things. And those four things are things that living creatures all need. So if I was going to ask you, what are four things that living creatures need? You might start first with air or oxygen, water or moisture, maybe food, something to eat, and then last you might say a house. In this case, we might look at it as a shelter. If we have a worm composting operation, we'd want to put them in a little shelter. But think of it in terms of regulating the temperature, in the sense that when we put a whole mass of materials together, we're in a sense insulating things. We also need insulation too. It's a little bit cold today. All right, so think about those things: air, water, food, and the environment or the shelter. And in this case, when we think of food, it's not just food that we throw away or food that we ingest. Think about it as food for microorganisms, because that's ultimately what we're doing. We're feeding microorganisms that are going to break down this material and break it down into that soil-like substance. So to begin with, I usually use a gallon bag. I like Ziploc just because it's easier. You can also write on them, right, which is nice. So if you have multiple bags, maybe multiple children, or maybe you're doing some comparisons, you can write right on the bag. I have a bag started already with some food scraps, and I want to let you know that I had this bag, and I filled it on Thursday, and today is Tuesday. So I filled this on Thursday, and it's a little puffy. Almost looks like it's got some gas in there. So if I were to open it up, if we were in person, I would say, who wants to smell it? But of course we're not in person. I'm going to open it gingerly. So it really stinks. And why does it stink? It stinks because it's anaerobic. It's without oxygen. So the term is anaerobic, without oxygen. We want to do composting with oxygen. So while I close my bag for so many days, we're going to want to do some alternating, opening and closing the bag, and opening and closing the bag. So it'll be an aerobic composting system. So I have some food scraps. You can do different things if you're doing a science experiment or you want to challenge yourself. You could measure how much food scraps you're putting in. You can measure the type of food scraps you're putting in. You could cut up food scraps. You can compare like large pieces versus small pieces. You could do a hypothesis. I think my banana peel is going to break down faster than my carrot peels. You could have all of that in one bag or two bags, which is kind of fun. You could also, if you're in a classroom setting, and sometimes you're in the classroom and sometimes you're at home, you could send people home with bags. You could even send partners home. So one partner gets bag A and one partner gets bag B, and you're doing a comparison of some kind. So in addition to food scraps, some general resources that we want are leaves. So some of these leaves I have are somewhat fresh. These came from the last tropical storm where we had a lot of leaves come down, and so they're still green. But I also have some leaves from last year that were in a pile, and so I'm going to put some of those in too. You'll find that leaves smell sort of like, if you're walking in the woods, it smells like it smells like the soil in the woods or the forest, which makes sense. This is sometimes referred to as natural litter. So I'm going to put lots of leaves in there because I sealed it for effect to help me with my story. It's a little bit moist on the bottom of this bag and a little gooey. So I want to make sure that I have a lot of carbon materials. That's right. So if we think about food that we're feeding microorganisms, we usually like to have a combination of carbon and nitrogen. It's the same thing that if we were going to have a home composting system. Carbon is woody stuff like leaves, maybe paper. Nitrogen, or green stuff, tends to be food scraps or fresh grass. So the fun with this, it's leaking a little bit. The fun with this is you can, I'm going to need a new shirt. You can squeeze it and you can mix it by hand. Something that you want to add to this to get it going, some people call it like an inoculum or inoculator, is you could use regular soil, but I have some finished compost. So I'm just going to take a little measuring cup. And again, if you're doing this as a science experiment, measure it out. Record what you're doing. I'm just going to put, let's see, I've got a little 1/8 of a cup, so this is about a 1/2 cup of finished compost. Let's see if it seals. I am using an old bag. Maybe don't use an old bag if you put mushy, wet waste. And so I'm mixing it together. I have a lemon peel in there. How long do you think it'll take to break down that? Probably a little bit longer than the rotten tomatoes I have in there. So what are some other things that I can put in my compost in a bag? Well, I also have some pine needles. And pine needles change the acidity. So if you want to learn about acidity, you'll understand that this is going to make it more acid. So I'm only going to put a little bit in. It's like a spice. It's like a little salt on top. It's going to help, but I don't want too much. I can mix it some more. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait. So some more educational opportunities. The best thing to do with compost in a bag is to have it open one day and then seal it the second. This is great if you're working with young children because you could teach odds and even, or certain days of the week, or you get my drift. So today is what, the 15th? So today is an odd day. So I'm going to leave it open because I like the alliteration. Open on odd, and we'll do closed on even. So if I was going to do some experiments, I think I might try helping understand what are things that can decompose versus not decompose. Now we have food scraps, which we know are natural materials that are going to break down, and leaves are what we call natural litter. But what if we put other types of litter in there? What if we did two different bags, and one bag we did like a plastic material and a paper material? Would both break down? Would only one break down? What happens to this material? That's a good science experiment. Or what else? What other kinds of material? Will cork break down? Will a metal cap break down? A plastic cap, will that break down? Will it decompose into a soil-like substance? What about other types of litter we might find? Straws? Parts of bottles? For young kids, you might try something more fun. I have an acorn. I have a rock. I have a shell. That's kind of fun. I have a piece of, believe it or not, sea glass or beach glass. And then I've got some plastic toys. You could put them all in, or you could set up different bags for each kind and then do some comparisons and record your observations. And you could, of course, hypothesize. Think about what you think is going to happen and write that down, and then see if your hypothesis is correct or not. You could even go and take it a step further and do string or yarn. Would polyester yarn break down? What about wool yarn? Will that break down? Will a cotton string break down? And if these do break down, how long will it take for everything to break down? So you can tie any of these activities in with projects related to decomposition, forestry, resource conservation, litter and marine debris, etc. If you're an educator and you are part of the project learning tree, there's a lot of activities that link with this, from Project Learning Tree, Project Wet, Food, Land, and People, and Project Wild. And then the other thing to be aware of, if you are an educator and you are not familiar with DEEP's resource called the Trillium newsletter, the Trillium newsletter is great in that it lists upcoming professional development workshops for educators, which of course are all online now, and then most of them, I would say most of them, if not all of them, are free. They not only have activities for adults to help you figure out how to integrate some of these ideas into your classroom activities for this new world we have, but they also have some family-friendly activities that parents can do with children. And so this is a very long URL, so I apologize, but it's the Trillium newsletter. And this is how you get there. And you can look at the September and August issue, which has a lot of upcoming professional development workshops for educators and teachers. And then you can also sign up so you can receive future ones. So this is great also if you're homeschooling or partially schooling or just want to have some fun with your kids. The Trillium is a great newsletter to sign up for. And I think that's it for me. One last thing. We want to review the air, water, food, and shelter. So we've got our bag. That's our shelter. I put in a mixture of food. I put in food scraps, I put in leaves, I put in a little pine needles, and then I put in some finished compost to kind of activate it, because they're going to have some that finished compost is going to have some microorganisms in it. I think normally I would say, is it moist enough? And you might want to put some moisture in. But as I mentioned, I let it sit for a few days for effect. And it kind of, I had a lot of rotten tomatoes and it kind of got gooey. And so my compost is moist enough. If it's not moist enough and you want to put a little water, you want it like a wrung out sponge. And so you don't want it soaking and you don't want it dry, but you want it moist. And then again, odd and even, odd and even. I'm going to keep my bag going and I'll come back, I don't know, maybe in 4 weeks, and we'll take a look to see what I got. I thank you very much for joining me today at Trash Talk, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.